Sarah Chen adjusted her uniform one last time before stepping through the airlock of Station Omega-7. The metallic corridors stretched before her, filled with beings she'd only seen in training hollows. Tall crystalline Vectari conversed in chiming tones while furry Gorlan engineers scurried past with tool belts jangling. The air recyclers hummed with an alien rhythm that made her Earth-trained ears twitch. Another human, she heard someone whisper in Galactic Standard. They keep sending more of them. Sarah pretended not to understand, though her translator implant caught every word. 3 months of intensive language training had prepared her for this moment, but nothing could have prepared her for the weight of 1,000 alien stares. She was the newest addition to the Galactic Defense Initiative's most remote outpost, and apparently the least welcome. Commander Zethkri, a towering insectoid with mandibles that clicked when he spoke, barely glanced up from his datapad when she reported for duty. His compound eyes reflected the station's harsh lighting as he handed her assignment orders without ceremony. Perimeter monitoring, level 7, he buzzed in heavily accented standard. You will observe and report. Nothing more. Sarah accepted the datapad with steady hands, though inside she felt the familiar sting of dismissal. Back on Earth, she'd been Special Forces, decorated for operations that remained classified even now. Here, she was just another primitive from a backwater world that had barely achieved faster-than-light travel. The monitoring station turned out to be a cramped cubicle filled with outdated equipment. The previous occupant, a nervous Rillan named Vex, seemed relieved to be reassigned elsewhere. He showed her the basic controls with trembling tentacles. The sensors cover the void sector, Vex explained, his translator making his words sound tinny. Nothing ever happens there, just dark space, empty space, safe space. He paused, looking at her with large, worried eyes. Humans see things differently than us, yes? Perhaps you will see nothing, like the rest of us. After Vex scurried away, Sarah settled into her new routine. The void sector stretched endlessly before her sensors, a patch of space so empty that most civilizations had written it off centuries ago. Ancient star charts marked it as a navigation hazard due to gravitational anomalies, but modern ships simply plotted courses around it. For weeks, Sarah watched the empty darkness. She learned the patterns of cosmic radiation, the subtle fluctuations in the sensor grid, the way solar wind from distant stars created false readings. Her fellow station personnel treated her with polite indifference, the way one might acknowledge a useful piece of furniture. During off-duty hours, she explored the station's social areas. The recreation deck buzzed with conversation in dozens of languages, but conversations died when she approached. Not from hostility exactly, but from a kind of bemused uncertainty. Humans were still too new to galactic society, too unknown a quantity. They think we're barbarians, Lieutenant Torres had warned her during their last conversation before departure. Prove them wrong, Chen, show them what humanity can do. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she sat, watching empty space while her skills in combat tactics, strategic analysis, and threat assessment went completely unused. The Galactic Defense Initiative had protocols for everything, procedures that had kept the peace for millennia. Humans, with their tendency toward improvisation and aggression, were viewed as dangerous wildcards best kept on the sidelines. 3 weeks into her assignment, Sarah noticed something odd. The gravitational sensors showed a slight anomaly in grid section 7 or alpha, barely registering above background noise. She ran diagnostics, checked historical data, and found nothing similar in the archives. The anomaly appeared random, meaningless. But Sarah had learned to trust her instincts in places where instincts were the difference between life and death. She began tracking the anomaly's patterns, creating her own analysis files outside the standard reporting protocols. The irregularities seemed to pulse in a rhythm that reminded her of something, though she couldn't place what. 2 more weeks passed. The anomaly grew stronger, more defined. Sarah's analysis suggested it might be artificial in nature, but every protocol insisted she report only confirmed threats. A gravitational flutter in empty space didn't qualify. She tried mentioning it to Sensor Chief Kralmoth, a veteran Thexani with scales that changed color with his mood. His scales shifted to dismissive purple as he reviewed her data. Cosmic debris, he rumbled. The void sector collects gravitational echoes from ancient stellar events. We have more important concerns than shadows in empty space. But the shadows were growing stronger. Sarah's enhanced pattern recognition, a trait that had made her valuable to Earth's military, kept insisting that this wasn't random. The pulses came in sequences, repeating patterns that suggested intentional design. Late one night during the station's rest cycle, Sarah made a decision that would have horrified her supervisors. She redirected additional sensor power to the void sector, using her security clearance to override standard power allocation protocols. If she was wrong, she'd face disciplinary action. If she was right, the enhanced sensors revealed something that made her blood freeze. The gravitational anomalies weren't random at all. They were engine signatures carefully modulated to avoid detection, dozens of them, all following precise formation patterns through the supposedly empty void. Sarah's hands flew over her controls, cross-referencing the signatures with every known ship design in the Galactic database. Nothing matched. The energy patterns were too advanced, too sophisticated for any known civilization. These weren't ships from any of the galaxy's registered species. Her training kicked in as she began tactical analysis of the formation patterns. This wasn't exploration or scientific research. The ships moved with military precision, following attack vectors that would bring them into range of 3 major populated systems within weeks. Sarah's heart pounded as the implications hit her. Someone was using the void sector as a staging ground for an invasion, counting on the sector's reputation for emptiness to mask their approach. Every scan protocol, every sensor sweep had been designed to ignore the kind of subtle signatures these ships were producing. But Sarah wasn't using standard protocols anymore. Her human intuition, combined with military training that emphasized thinking outside established parameters, had revealed what the galaxy's most advanced sensors had missed. She began compiling her report, knowing that her credibility as the new girl would make this a hard sell. But the evidence was undeniable, even if her methods had been unorthodox. Someone was coming through the void, and they definitely weren't friendly. As she prepared to sound the alarm that would change everything, Sarah Chen smiled grimly. Maybe being an unpredictable human wasn't such a disadvantage after all. The station's emergency klaxons shattered the artificial night cycle with piercing wails that seemed to vibrate through Sarah's bones. Red warning lights bathed the corridors in an ominous glow as she sprinted toward Commander Zethkri's office, her hastily compiled datapad clutched in her sweating palm. The command center erupted in controlled chaos. Officers from a dozen different species worked frantically at their stations, while Zethkri's mandibles clicked in rapid-fire commands. His compound eyes fixed on Sarah as she burst through the doors, and his expression shifted to something between annoyance and disbelief. "Specialist Chen," he buzzed, his translator struggling with the speed of his words. "You triggered a sector-wide alert based on gravitational shadows? Do you comprehend the resources you have wasted?" Sarah straightened her shoulders, falling back on military bearing even as doubt crept into her mind. Around the command center, alien faces turned toward her with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. She could hear whispered conversations in languages her implant couldn't quite catch. But the tone was universal. The new human had finally cracked under pressure. "Sir, I've detected multiple unknown vessels using the void sector as cover," she reported, extending her datapad. "Their engine signatures are unlike anything in our databases, and their formation patterns suggest hostile intent toward the Kepler, Vega, and Centauri systems." Commander Zethkri accepted the pad with one of his forearms while his other hands continued working at his command console. His eyes scanned the data with mechanical precision, but Sarah could see his mandibles relaxing into what she'd learned was the Thexcree equivalent of a dismissive smile. "These readings show nothing more than cosmic interference," he declared, loud enough for the entire command center to hear. "Your human pattern-seeking behavior has created threats where none exist. Perhaps the isolation of perimeter duty has affected your judgment." A wave of what sounded suspiciously like alien laughter rippled through the room. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she pressed forward. Her training had taught her to trust data over opinions, even when those opinions belonged to superior officers. "Sir, with respect, I enhanced the sensor array beyond standard parameters. The patterns are too regular to be natural phenomena. These signatures appear every 6.7 hours in a rotating sequence that follows standard military spacing protocols." Sensor Chief Kralmoth approached, his scales flickering between dismissive purple and annoyed orange. "Specialist Chen, your species has been part of galactic civilization for less than 50 standard years. Our sensor protocols have maintained peace for over 3 millennia. Perhaps you should trust in established procedures rather than human intuition. The words stung because they carried just enough truth to be devastating. Sarah was painfully aware of humanity's newcomer status, of how Earth's aggressive history made other species nervous about human judgment calls. But she was also aware that her species' survival had depended on exactly the kind of unconventional thinking that these protocols seemed designed to eliminate. "I understand the concern about my methods," Sarah said carefully, "but I request permission to maintain enhanced surveillance on the void sector. If I'm wrong, the additional sensor data will prove it conclusively." Commander Zethkree's mandibles clicked, and what Sarah had learned was the sound of decision-making. The command center fell silent except for the ambient hum of life support systems and the distant vibration of the station's rotation. "Very well," the commander finally announced. "You will continue monitoring with enhanced parameters, but any future alerts must be approved through proper channels. No more unilateral actions that waste fleet resources." The dismissal was clear, but Sarah felt a small victory in being allowed to continue her investigation. As she left the command center, she caught fragments of conversation that made her stomach clench. "Typical human paranoia," someone muttered in Vekthari. "Crystal speech. They see enemies everywhere." Another voice added in Gorlan clicks. "It's their primitive survival instinct." Back in her monitoring station, Sarah threw herself into her work with renewed determination. She couldn't afford to be wrong, not when her credibility and humanity's reputation hung in the balance. But she also couldn't ignore what her enhanced sensors were showing her. Over the following days, the pattern became even clearer. The unknown vessels were definitely there, moving in formations that no natural phenomenon could explain. Their engine signatures used a technology that seemed to bend space itself, creating gravitational distortions that barely registered on standard equipment. Sarah began building a comprehensive tactical analysis, something that went far beyond her official duties. She mapped the vessels' positions, calculated their probable destinations, and analyzed their formation patterns against every military doctrine in her memory. What she found made her blood run cold. The unknown fleet wasn't just heading toward populated systems. They were positioning themselves for a coordinated strike that would hit 3 major worlds simultaneously. The timing suggested they understood Galactic defense protocols well enough to exploit the gaps between regional response fleets. But the most disturbing revelation came when Sarah cross-referenced the attack vectors with Galactic political intelligence. The 3 target systems weren't random. Kepler Station housed the Galactic Defense Initiative's primary communication hub. Vega Colony controlled the largest shipyards outside the core worlds. Centauri Prime served as the central banking nexus for half the galaxy's economic transactions. Someone was planning to cripple galactic civilization's communication, production, and economic infrastructure in a single coordinated assault. And they were using technology that suggested they knew exactly how galactic sensors worked and how to avoid them. Sarah's mind raced as she considered the implications. This wasn't just an invasion. It was a decapitation strike designed to leave the galaxy blind, defenseless, and economically paralyzed. Whoever was behind this understood galactic civilization well enough to target its most vulnerable points. But they hadn't counted on a paranoid human with access to enhanced sensors and the training to recognize military patterns. When she saw them, Sarah began preparing a new report. This one much more detailed than her first attempt. She included tactical assessments, threat analyses, and strategic recommendations that drew on everything Earth's military had learned about asymmetric warfare. She documented every sensor reading, every pattern analysis, every piece of evidence that supported her conclusions. As she worked, Sarah realized that her outsider status might actually be an advantage. The other species on the station had been conditioned by millennia of established protocols. They trusted in systems that had worked for thousands of years. But Sarah had been trained in an environment where those systems didn't exist, where survival depended on adapting to new threats and unconventional tactics. The unknown enemy was counting on galactic civilization's predictability. They had planned their approach based on standard sensor sweeps and established defense patterns. But they hadn't planned for a human with the stubbornness to enhance sensors beyond protocol limits and the paranoia to see threats in empty space. Sarah finished her report. Just as the station's morning cycle began, the corridors filled with beings starting their daily routines, unaware that their entire way of life might be under threat from an enemy they couldn't even detect. She sealed the report with her personal security codes and prepared to face another round of dismissive skepticism. But this time, she had more than gravitational shadows to present. This time, she had a complete tactical picture of the greatest threat galactic civilization had ever faced. And whether her fellow officers believed her or not, Sarah Chen was going to make sure someone took action before it was too late. The message that changed everything arrived during Sarah's sleep cycle, transmitted through channels so heavily encrypted that her personal communicator required 3 separate authentication protocols just to display it. The sender's identity made her heart skip. Admiral Keshitai of the Galactic Defense Initiative's Special Operations Division, one of the most decorated military leaders in known space. Specialist Chen, the message began in crisp galactic standard. Your tactical analysis has been reviewed by our strategic assessment team. Report to classified briefing room Gamma 7 at 0800 station time. Tell no one of this communication. Sarah stared at the message until it auto-deleted according to security protocols. Someone in the upper levels of Galactic Command had taken her seriously enough to bypass her entire chain of command. Either she was about to be vindicated, or she was about to face consequences for her unauthorized sensor modifications that went far beyond a simple reprimand. Briefing room. Gamma 7 turned out to be a section of the station Sarah hadn't even known existed. Hidden behind blast doors that required special clearance codes, the room felt more like a bunker than a meeting space. Advanced holographic projectors dominated the central area, surrounded by workstations equipped with technology that made Sarah's monitoring equipment look like stone tools. Admiral Keshitai stood with her back to the door when Sarah entered. The Altarian's silver skin reflected the room's subdued lighting, and her forearms moved in precise patterns as she manipulated holographic displays showing the void sector. Sarah had never seen such detailed sensor data, with resolution that revealed details she could never have imagined from her basic equipment. Your enhanced sensor modifications were quite ingenious, the Admiral said without turning around. Unauthorized and technically illegal, but ingenious nonetheless. We've been monitoring your activities since you first triggered the alert protocols. Sarah's mouth went dry. Ma'am, I can explain the protocol violations. Explanations can wait, Keshitai interrupted, finally facing Sarah with eyes that seemed to glow with inner light. Right now, I need you to look at this data and tell me if your tactical assessment remains unchanged. The holographic display expanded to fill the room with a 3-dimensional map of the void sector. Sarah gasped as she saw the true scope of what she had detected. Her enhanced sensors had captured only a fraction of the reality. Hundreds of vessels moved through the darkness, their formations so complex and precise that they looked like a living organism sliding through space. How many ships? Sarah whispered. Current count stands at 412 confirmed vessels, Keshitai replied. Possibly more hiding in the gravitational shadows of the larger craft. Each one is approximately twice the size of our heavy cruisers, and they're using propulsion technology that shouldn't exist. Sarah studied the formation patterns with growing unease. These aren't just attack formations. This is an entire invasion fleet with support vessels, supply ships, and what looks like mobile command centers. Whoever they are, they're planning to stay. Agreed. But here's what concerns us most. The Admiral manipulated the display to highlight specific vessels scattered throughout the fleet. These ships are broadcasting identification codes. Sarah leaned forward as the data filled her vision. Ship registrations, crew manifests, even cargo declarations appeared in neat columns of text. But something about the information felt wrong, like a perfect forgery that was too clean to be real. These are all vessels reported lost or destroyed over the past 2 years, Keshitai explained. Merchant ships that vanished in pirate raids, exploration vessels that disappeared near unstable wormholes, even military craft lost in training accidents. According to our records, every single one of these ships is officially dead. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. Someone's been collecting our ships, using them to build an invasion fleet that our own sensors won't recognize as hostile. Precisely. And they've been very selective about their targets. Every missing vessel had access to current navigation data, communication protocols, and defensive systems information. This fleet knows our capabilities better than we do. Sarah's mind raced through tactical possibilities. If they're using our own ships, they'll have our IFF codes, our approach vectors, even our fleet movement patterns. They could walk right into any system without triggering defensive responses. Which brings us to you, Specialist Chen. The Admiral's expression grew serious. Your species has a talent for unconventional warfare that we've found useful. Earth's military history is filled with examples of small forces defeating larger opponents through superior tactics and willingness to break conventional rules. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. What are you asking me to do? We need someone who can think like the enemy. Someone who isn't bound by 3,000 years of galactic military doctrine. Someone who can devise strategies that our opponents won't anticipate because they're too familiar with how we normally operate. The holographic display shifted to show the 3 target systems Sarah had identified. Detailed tactical overlays showed defensive positions, fleet deployments, and civilian population centers. The picture was grimly clear. If the enemy fleet reached those systems using captured ship codes, the defenses would be completely useless. Current defensive doctrine calls for a massive fleet deployment to intercept the enemy in deep space. Keshtai continued. A traditional engagement where superior numbers and firepower would normally guarantee victory. But we can't mass our fleets without leaving other systems vulnerable, and we can't trust our own identification systems to distinguish friend from foe. Sarah studied the tactical situation with growing understanding. You need an asymmetric response. Something they won't expect because it goes against every established protocol. Exactly. We're promoting you to the rank of Lieutenant Commander and assigning you to a special tactical unit. Your mission is to develop strategies that a conventional galactic military mind would never consider. The promotion would have been thrilling under any other circumstances, but Sarah found herself focused entirely on the problem at hand. The enemy had spent years preparing for this assault, studying galactic defenses and collecting the tools needed to penetrate them. They had planned for everything except the possibility that someone might detect them before they were ready to strike. I'll need detailed intelligence on their fleet composition, movement patterns, and communication protocols, Sarah said. And I'll need access to officers who understand unconventional warfare, preferably other humans if they're available. Already arranged. Lieutenant Torres arrives tomorrow, along with tactical specialists from Earth's Special Operations Command. You'll have resources that most galactic commanders only dream about. Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Somewhere in the depths of space, an enemy fleet was preparing to destroy everything she had sworn to protect. They had superior numbers, advanced technology, and years of careful preparation. But they had made one critical mistake. They had planned their assault assuming that galactic civilization would respond according to established patterns. They had counted on predictability, protocol, and the kind of conventional thinking that had kept the peace for millennia. What they hadn't counted on was a paranoid human with enhanced sensors and the stubborn refusal to accept that empty space was really empty. When do we begin? Sarah asked. Admiral Keshetai's expression revealed something that might have been a smile. We already have. The moment you detected those gravitational shadows, this war began. Now we just need to make sure we're the ones who finish it. As Sarah left the briefing room, her mind was already racing with possibilities. The enemy thought they knew galactic military doctrine well enough to defeat it. Time to show them what happened when humans got creative with the rules of warfare. After all, the best defense against an unexpected attack was an even more unexpected counterattack. Lieutenant Torres arrived on the next supply transport, along with 2 other Earth military specialists that Sarah had never expected to see again. Major Hassan, her former commanding officer from the Damascus incident, stepped off the transport with the same confident swagger that had inspired troops across 3 star systems. Behind him came Captain Park, the tactical genius who had revolutionized orbital assault doctrine during the Titan Rebellion. Well, Torres grinned as he approached Sarah in the station's docking bay. Look who went from monitoring empty space to commanding a tactical unit. I told you those aliens didn't know what they were dealing with. Sarah felt a surge of relief at seeing familiar faces. Working with aliens had taught her the value of diversity in thinking, but there was something comforting about being around people who understood human tactical instincts without needing translation. The situation is worse than the initial reports suggested. Sarah briefed them as they walked toward their new operations center. The enemy fleet has been collecting our ships for years, and they know our defensive protocols better than most of our own officers. Traditional engagement strategies won't work. Major Hassan nodded grimly. Admiral Keshatai's briefing mentioned that. She also mentioned that you've been given carte blanche to develop unconventional responses. That's either a tremendous vote of confidence or a convenient way to blame humans when everything goes wrong. Probably both, Captain Park added with characteristic bluntness. But it also means we can do things that would get normal officers court-martialed. I assume you have ideas? Sarah led them into the new tactical center that had been constructed in record time. The room bristled with advanced holographic displays, quantum computers, and communication arrays that could reach every corner of galactic space. At the center of it all stood a massive three-dimensional projection, showing the enemy fleet in real-time detail. 437 confirmed vessels as of this morning, Sarah reported. They're maintaining radio silence except for automated distress signals, designed to make our patrols think they're looking at wreckage fields. But their formation patterns tell a different story. She manipulated the display to highlight movement vectors and timing sequences. They're planning a three-pronged assault that will hit the Kepler, Vega, and Centauri systems simultaneously. Each strike force will approach using captured ship IFFs, broadcasting standard merchant traffic or patrol schedules. By the time our defenses realize what's happening, they'll be inside the defensive perimeters with their weapons charged. Torres studied the tactical overlay with the intensity that had made him Earth's youngest special operations commander. Galactic Defense Initiative doctrine calls for massing fleets to meet threats in deep space. They're counting on us doing exactly that. Which leaves us with a choice, Hassan observed. Follow doctrine and walk into a trap, or abandon doctrine and try something they won't expect. Sarah smiled for the first time in days. That's where human tactical thinking comes in. We're going to give them exactly what they're expecting, and then hit them with something completely different. She activated a new section of the display, showing detailed schematics of captured vessels and their probable modifications. The enemy has been very careful about maintaining the external appearances of our ships. They want them to pass visual inspection if necessary, but all that stealth technology and advanced weaponry has to go somewhere. Captain Park leaned forward, her tactical mind already working through the implications. Internal modifications would affect mass distribution, power signatures, and maneuvering characteristics. They might look like our ships from the outside, but they won't handle like them. Exactly. And that gives us an opportunity to identify them before they reach their targets. But we need to get close enough to make detailed scans without triggering a premature attack. Sarah brought up a new tactical display showing her proposed strategy. We're going to use their own deception against them. Small teams of volunteers will approach the enemy fleet using ships that appear to be joining their formation. Once we're close enough to identify their command vessels and gather detailed intelligence, we spring the trap. Torres whistled low. That's insane enough to work, but it's also a one-way mission for anyone who volunteers. Even if we successfully infiltrate their formation, getting out alive will be nearly impossible. Which is why we're not planning to get out, Sarah replied. We're planning to take their command structure with us. The room fell silent as the full scope of her proposal became clear. This wasn't just an intelligence-gathering mission. It was a decapitation strike designed to eliminate the enemy's ability to coordinate their assault. Major Hassan was the first to speak. You're talking about a suicide mission. I'm talking about the only tactical option that gives galactic civilization a chance to survive, Sarah corrected. If this fleet reaches its targets, they'll cripple our ability to organize any effective resistance. We need to disrupt their command structure before they can begin their assault. Captain Park was already working through the tactical details. We'd need ships that can pass for captured vessels, volunteers with the skills to operate under deep cover, and some way to identify and eliminate their command staff without alerting the rest of the fleet. All doable, Sarah replied. Admiral Keshatai has given us access to several vessels that match profiles in the enemy fleet. As for the rest, she paused, looking at each of her fellow officers. We're humans. Improvisation and desperate tactics are what we do best. Over the following hours, they refined the plan into something that might actually work. Small teams would infiltrate the enemy formation using modified ships equipped with quantum communication arrays. Once inside, they would map the fleet's command structure, identify priority targets, and coordinate simultaneous strikes designed to maximize confusion and disruption. The operation would require perfect timing, flawless deception, and a willingness to sacrifice everything for the chance to prevent a galactic catastrophe. In other words, it was exactly the kind of mission that human special operations teams had been performing for centuries. "There's one more thing," Sarah added as they finalized the operational details. "The enemy knows galactic military doctrine, but they might not understand human psychological warfare. We're going to make them think they're facing a much larger force than they actually are." She activated a final display showing communication intercept protocols and electronic warfare strategies. "Once we're inside their formation, we start broadcasting false fleet movements, fake casualty reports, and manufactured intelligence suggesting that galactic forces are mobilizing on multiple fronts. We make them think their intelligence was wrong and that we've been expecting them all along." Torres grinned with the expression of someone who had found his calling. "Chaos and confusion. Make them second-guess everything they think they know about our capabilities. And while they're trying to figure out what's real and what's deception, our real fleets move into position for a coordinated counterattack," Hassan concluded. "It's brilliant. Also completely insane, but brilliant." Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with finalizing a high-risk operation. "Admiral Keshatai wants us to think like the enemy, but I think it's time we reminded the galaxy why humans are considered dangerous. We're not just going to defeat this invasion. We're going to do it in a way that makes sure no one ever tries something like this again." As her team began detailed mission planning, Sarah looked out at the stars visible through the tactical center's observation windows. Somewhere in that darkness, an enemy fleet was preparing to destroy everything she cared about. They had superior numbers, better technology, and years of careful preparation. But they had made the mistake of underestimating human ingenuity and the willingness of Earth's children to do whatever it took to protect their adopted home among the stars. Time to show them exactly what humanity brought to galactic civilization. After all, sometimes the best way to defeat an overwhelming enemy was to convince them that they were the ones who were outnumbered. The modified transport ship Merchant's Dream drifted toward the enemy formation with all the grace of genuine space debris. Sarah watched from the concealed command station as her infiltration team made final preparations for what would either be the most successful intelligence operation in galactic history or a spectacular failure that would cost them everything. "Passive sensors show we're being scanned," reported Ensign Kim from the communication station. "They're using standard merchant verification protocols. Our false transponder codes are holding." Sarah nodded, though tension made her shoulders ache. 3 days of preparation had gone into making their ship appear like one of the captured vessels. External hull modifications, fake damage patterns, and carefully crafted distress signals all combined to create the illusion of a merchant vessel that had been taken by pirates and pressed into service with the enemy fleet. "Remember," she said quietly into her comm, "we're supposed to be scared civilian crew forced to serve under threat. Act nervous, uncertain, but compliant. These people have been doing this for years, so they'll know what to expect from unwilling conscripts." Through the forward viewports, the enemy fleet spread before them like a constellation of death. The captured ships moved in perfect formation, their hulls bearing the scars of false battles and manufactured damage. But Sarah's enhanced sensors revealed the truth hidden beneath the deception. Weapon pods that had never existed on civilian vessels, shield generators powerful enough for military dreadnoughts, and propulsion systems that bent space in ways that should have been impossible. "Incoming transmission," Kim reported. "They want to know our ship designation and current mission assignment." Sarah activated the voice modulator that would make her sound appropriately terrified. "This is Merchant's Dream Registry Oscar 77 Kilo. We're carrying medical supplies for the forward scouts as ordered." The response came back in clipped, efficient tones that revealed nothing about the speaker's species or origin. "Proceed to formation grid Delta 4. Maintain communication silence until further notice. Any deviation from assigned vectors will result in immediate destruction." "Acknowledged," Sarah replied, injecting just the right amount of fear into her voice. Proceeding to Delta 4. As their ship maneuvered toward its assigned position, Sarah's team worked frantically to gather intelligence on the fleet's composition and command structure. Hidden sensors mapped ship configurations, recorded communication protocols, and analyzed the subtle electromagnetic, signatures that revealed each vessel's true capabilities, getting readings on approximately 50 command-level vessels, reported Lieutenant Torres from the tactical station. They're using a distributed command structure with redundant communication nodes, very sophisticated for what's supposed to be a pirate fleet. Major Hassan looked up from his analysis station with grim satisfaction. Found something interesting. These ships aren't just using our IFF codes. They're broadcasting complete operational histories, including maintenance records, crew rotations, and cargo manifests. Someone has been very thorough about creating believable cover identities. Sarah studied the data streaming across her displays. Too thorough. No pirate operation would have access to this level of detailed information. This isn't just theft, it's intelligence gathering on a massive scale. Someone has been infiltrating Galactic databases for years, which means they know our defensive capabilities better than we thought, Captain Park observed. They're not just using our ships, they're using our own tactical doctrine against us. The implications were staggering. If the enemy had access to classified military databases, they would know fleet deployment schedules, defensive protocols, and strategic planning documents. They weren't just planning an invasion. They were planning a systematic dismantling of galactic civilization using its own information against it. New priority, Sarah announced. We need to identify their intelligence sources and communication networks. If they have ongoing access to our systems, even defeating this fleet won't prevent future attacks. Over the following hours, Sarah's team methodically mapped the enemy formation while maintaining their cover as unwilling conscripts. The picture that emerged was even more disturbing than their worst fears. The fleet operated with military precision that suggested professional training and coordination that went far beyond anything pirates could achieve. These aren't pirates, Torres reported during a brief coded transmission to the rest of the infiltration teams. This is a military operation using piracy as cover. Someone with significant resources has been building this fleet specifically to attack galactic civilization. Sarah felt pieces clicking into place in her mind. What if this isn't just an invasion? What if it's a coup attempt? Someone who knows our systems well enough to exploit them, who has access to classified information, and who understands galactic military doctrine better than most serving officers. The thought was terrifying in its implications. If elements within galactic civilization itself were behind this attack, then traditional defensive strategies would be worse than useless. They would be walking into traps designed by people who knew exactly how they would respond. Focus on identifying the command vessels, Sarah ordered. We need to know who's really running this operation before we can figure out how to stop them. Their breakthrough came when Park detected unusual communication patterns between a cluster of seemingly ordinary cargo vessels. The ships maintained standard merchant formations, but their internal communications used military encryption protocols that were supposed to be classified above top secret level. Those aren't cargo ships, Park reported. They're command centers disguised as civilians, and they're using encryption keys that are only supposed to exist in Galactic Defense Initiative secure databases. Sarah stared at the tactical display as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. This wasn't just an external invasion. Someone within the highest levels of galactic government had been planning this assault from the inside, using classified information and stolen resources to build a fleet capable of overthrowing the existing order. Signal the other teams, she ordered. We've found our primary targets, and we've found something much worse than an invasion. As her team prepared for the final phase of their mission, Sarah realized that everything they thought they knew about this threat had been wrong. They weren't facing external enemies trying to conquer galactic civilization. They were facing internal enemies trying to replace it with something that would serve their own interests. But they had made one critical mistake. They had assumed that human tactical thinking would follow the same patterns as the galactic military doctrine they had studied so carefully. They had planned for conventional responses to conventional threats. What they hadn't planned for was a paranoid human who refused to accept that empty space was really empty, and who had just figured out exactly who was behind the greatest betrayal in galactic history. All teams, this is actual, Sarah transmitted on the coded quantum channel. We have positive identification of command targets and confirmed intelligence breach at the highest levels. Initiate Phase 2. Time to remind these traitors why humans are considered dangerous. The time for gathering intelligence was over. Now came the part that humans had always done best, turning impossible odds into devastating victories through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. After all, the best way to deal with a conspiracy was to make the conspirators realize they had picked the wrong species to betray. The quantum communication array crackled to life as Sarah's infiltration teams prepared to execute the most audacious military operation in galactic history. Across the enemy fleet, 12 small teams of human special operations personnel had positioned themselves within striking distance of command vessels, intelligence nodes, and communication hubs. What they were about to attempt would either save galactic civilization or ensure its complete destruction. All Reaper teams, this is actual, Sarah transmitted on the encrypted channel. Execute Operation Thunderclap in 30 seconds. Remember, we're not just taking out their command structure. We're sending a message that betrayal has consequences. Through her ship's concealed sensors, Sarah watched the enemy fleet continuing its inexorable advance toward the 3 target systems. In less than 6 hours, they would reach the point where traditional galactic defenses would be useless. But in the next few minutes, they were about to learn what happened when humans decided that following the rules was less important than protecting innocent lives. Reaper 7, confirming visual on primary command vessel, came the report from Captain Park's team, detecting high-level communication traffic and strategic coordination protocols. These are definitely the puppet masters. Reaper 3, weapons hot, reported Major Hassan. Intelligence node confirmed. They're actively accessing Galactic Defense Initiative databases in real time. Someone is feeding them current fleet positions and defensive protocols. Sarah felt cold fury settle in her stomach. The betrayal was even worse than they had suspected. While human teams risked everything to gather intelligence, someone in Galactic Command was providing the enemy with up-to-the-minute information about their own forces. All teams initiate disruption protocols, Sarah commanded. Make them think they're facing the entire galactic fleet. Time to show these traitors what human psychological warfare looks like. Across the enemy formation, Sarah's teams began broadcasting false communications designed to create maximum confusion, fake fleet movement orders, manufactured casualty reports, and carefully crafted intelligence suggesting massive galactic forces converging on their position flooded the enemy communication networks. Emergency broadcast from Kepler Station. Torres transmitted using captured communication codes. All available fleets converging on coordinates 77 Alpha. Estimated arrival in 4 hours. Hostile fleet size underestimated. Repeat. Hostile fleet size significantly underestimated. The response was immediate. Sarah watched through her sensors as the enemy formation began to shift, with command vessels attempting to verify the false intelligence while maintaining operational security. The carefully planned assault timeline was already beginning to unravel as confusion spread through their ranks. Reaper 9, detecting panic communications on secondary channels, reported one of the infiltration teams. They're trying to confirm galactic fleet positions and getting contradictory information from their intelligence sources. Sarah smiled grimly. That's because their intelligence sources are about to have a very bad day. All teams, execute primary objectives. Take out those command vessels and make it loud. What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations. 12 human special operations teams, outnumbered by thousands to one, launched simultaneous strikes against the most heavily defended targets in the enemy fleet. But they weren't trying to destroy the ships. They were trying to capture them. Reaper 7, boarding action commenced, Park reported as her team breached the hull of the primary command vessel. Encountering resistance from what appear to be Thexcree military personnel. Definitely not pirates. The confirmation sent shockwaves through the human teams. Thexcree were one of the founding members of galactic civilization, respected for their military tradition and unwavering loyalty to galactic law. If Thexcree officers were involved in this conspiracy, the betrayal went deeper than anyone had imagined. Capture any command personnel alive, Sarah ordered. We need to know who else is involved in this conspiracy. Through her ship's communication array, Sarah could hear the sounds of close-quarters combat as her teams fought their way through the enemy command vessels. But these weren't desperate last stands. These were precise operations designed to seize control of the ship's communication systems and access their intelligence databases. Reaper 3, we're in their main computer core, Hassan reported, downloading everything we can find. You're not going to believe what's in here. Try me, Sarah replied. Complete organizational charts for a shadow government, financial records showing payments to dozens of species across the galaxy, and communication logs with someone called the Architect. This conspiracy includes sitting members of the Galactic Council. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. This wasn't just a military coup. It was a complete overthrow of galactic civilization by people who were supposed to be its protectors. The enemy fleet was just the military arm of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government. Reaper teams, new priority, Sarah commanded. We need those communication logs and organizational charts transmitted to loyal elements of the galactic fleet. This is bigger than an invasion. It's a complete betrayal of everything galactic civilization stands for. As her teams worked to expose the conspiracy, Sarah began implementing the final phase of Operation Thunderclap. Using the captured command, Vessel's communication systems, she began broadcasting the truth to the entire galaxy. This is Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen of the Galactic Defense Initiative, she announced on all emergency frequencies. I am transmitting evidence of a conspiracy to overthrow galactic civilization using stolen ships and corrupted officials. The attack fleet approaching Kepler, Vega, and Centauri systems is operating under the direction of traitors within our own government. The broadcast included everything her teams had discovered: organizational charts, financial records, communication, logs, and tactical plans that revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. Within minutes, the information was spreading across galactic communication networks faster than any attempt to suppress it. Reaper 1, we've got problems, Torres reported. The enemy fleet is beginning to scatter. They know their operation has been compromised. Sarah watched through her sensors as the carefully coordinated invasion force began to break apart. Some ships continued toward their original targets, while others attempted to flee toward jump points that would take them beyond galactic jurisdiction. But the damage was already done. The conspiracy had been exposed, and the galaxy now knew the truth about who was behind the attack. All teams, prepare for extraction, Sarah ordered. We've accomplished our primary mission. Time to get out before they decide to cut their losses and eliminate the witnesses. But even as her teams prepared to withdraw, Sarah realized that their work was far from finished. They had exposed the conspiracy and disrupted the invasion, but the traitors were still out there. And now that their plot had been revealed, they would be even more dangerous. Reaper teams, this is actual, she transmitted. We've started something that's going to reshape galactic civilization. The galaxy now knows that its greatest enemies aren't external threats. They're the people who were supposed to be protecting it. As her ship prepared to break away from the enemy formation, Sarah looked out at the stars and realized that everything was about to change. The galaxy had just learned that humans were more than useful additions to galactic society. They were the ones who had saved it from betrayal and destruction. But the real test would come next, when galactic civilization had to decide whether to trust the evidence that humans had died to provide, or to continue trusting the institutions that had been corrupted from within. Either way, Sarah Chen was no longer just the new girl watching empty space. She was the human who had exposed the greatest conspiracy in galactic history and given civilization a chance to save itself. 6 months after Operation Thunderclap, Sarah stood before the newly formed Galactic Assembly in what had once been the chambers of the corrupted Galactic Council. The massive hall buzzed with translations in hundreds of languages as representatives from every known species gathered to hear the final report on the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed their civilization. The evidence her teams had gathered had triggered the largest investigation in galactic history. Corrupt officials on dozens of worlds had been arrested. Shadow financial networks had been dismantled, and the mysterious figure known as the Architect had been revealed as former Admiral Zethkar, the architect of modern galactic defense doctrine who had spent decades positioning his allies in key positions throughout the government. The human tactical teams designated as Reaper Squad prevented not just an invasion, but the complete overthrow of democratic galactic governance, announced Chancellor Velnara. the Altarian diplomat who had emerged as the leader of the reformed government. Their willingness to sacrifice everything for the protection of species not their own has redefined what it means to be part of galactic civilization. Sarah shifted uncomfortably as applause echoed through the chamber. The praise felt strange after months of testimony, investigations, and the painful process of rebuilding galactic institutions from the ground up. 7 of her 12 team members hadn't survived the operation, and their sacrifice weighed heavily on her mind even as the galaxy celebrated their victory. The conspiracy reached into every aspect of galactic society, continued the Chancellor. Military command, civilian government, economic institutions, and even academic organizations had been infiltrated by agents working to destabilize our civilization from within. Without the early detection and decisive action of human personnel, this assembly would not exist. Today, the irony wasn't lost on Sarah. The same species that had been viewed with suspicion for their aggressive tendencies and refusal to follow established protocols had become the saviors of galactic civilization. The traits that made other species nervous about humans had been exactly what was needed to detect and counter a threat that conventional thinking couldn't handle. Lieutenant Commander Chen, the Chancellor called, "The Assembly has reached a unanimous decision regarding humanity's role in the new galactic order. Would you approach the podium?" Sarah walked forward, acutely aware of thousands of alien eyes focused on her. The past months had changed her from an unknown specialist monitoring empty space to one of the most recognized figures in galactic society. But she still felt like the same person who had noticed gravitational anomalies that everyone else dismissed as cosmic debris. The Assembly recognizes that human tactical thinking represents a crucial element in galactic defense, Chancellor Velnara announced. Therefore, we are establishing the Human Strategic Initiative, a new branch of galactic defense specifically designed to identify and counter unconventional threats. Lieutenant Commander Chen, you are hereby promoted to Admiral and appointed as the HSI's first director. The applause was thunderous, but Sarah found herself thinking about the lessons learned during the conspiracy investigation. The enemy had succeeded as long as they had because galactic civilization had become predictable, following established patterns that could be studied and exploited. What they needed wasn't just human tactical thinking, but the kind of diversity and approach that prevented any single methodology from becoming a vulnerability. "Thank you, Chancellor," Sarah said as she reached the podium, "but I'd like to propose a modification to the Human Strategic Initiative. Instead of focusing solely on human tactics, we should create a truly integrated approach that combines the best thinking from all our species." The conspiracy succeeded because they understood our predictable responses. We need to become unpredictable. She turned to address the full assembly. Humans brought certain capabilities to this crisis, but we couldn't have succeeded alone. Altarian diplomatic networks provided crucial intelligence. Thexacree military discipline ensured our operations maintained proper security. Thekthari computational analysis helped us process massive amounts of data in real time. Every species contributed something essential. Sarah paused, looking out at the diverse gathering of beings who had come together to rebuild their shared civilization. The real lesson isn't that humans are uniquely valuable. It's that diversity of thought and approach is our greatest strength. The conspiracy failed because they planned for conventional responses from conventional minds. We succeeded because we brought together unconventional thinking from multiple perspectives. The chamber erupted in discussion as the implications of her proposal spread through the assembly. Sarah could see delegates conferring in rapid conversations, translators struggling to keep up with the flood of commentary, and what looked like genuine excitement building among representatives who had grown tired of rigid institutional thinking. Chancellor Velnara called for order, but her expression suggested that Sarah's proposal had resonated with something the Assembly had been trying to articulate. "Admiral Chen, are you suggesting that the Human Strategic Initiative should become a more broadly inclusive organization?" "I'm suggesting that we call it the Diverse Strategic Initiative," Sarah replied, "and that we staff it with the most unconventional thinkers from every species, not just humans. The goal should be to ensure that galactic civilization never becomes predictable enough to be exploited again." The debate that followed lasted for hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The Assembly had seen what could be accomplished when different approaches to problem-solving were combined effectively. More importantly, They had seen the price of allowing any single methodology to dominate strategic thinking. When the final vote was tallied, the diverse strategic initiative was approved by an overwhelming margin. Sarah found herself appointed as its first director, with a mandate to recruit the most creative and unconventional tactical minds from across galactic civilization. As the assembly session concluded, Sarah was approached by Admiral Keshatai, who had become one of her strongest supporters during the investigation. "I have to admit," the Altarian said with what might have been a smile, "when I first reviewed your report about gravitational anomalies, I thought you were just another paranoid human seeing threats where none existed." Sarah chuckled. "To be fair, I was being paranoid. It just turned out that being paranoid was exactly what the situation required. Indeed, and that's perhaps the most important lesson from this entire crisis. Sometimes the traits that make us uncomfortable are exactly the ones we need most." Later that evening, Sarah stood in her new office overlooking the rebuilt governmental complex. Through the transparent aluminum windows, she could see ships from dozens of species coming and going, carrying representatives back to their homeworlds with news of the new galactic order. Her personal communicator chimed with an incoming message from Lieutenant Torres, who had been promoted to colonel and assigned as her deputy director. "Congratulations on the new position, Admiral," his message read. "Just remember, you're still the same person who enhanced sensors beyond protocol limits because you trusted your instincts over established procedures. Don't let bureaucracy turn you into the kind of conventional thinker we just spent 6 months fighting against." Sarah smiled as she deleted the message. Torres was right, of course. The real challenge wouldn't be building the diverse strategic initiative. It would be ensuring that it never became the kind of rigid institution that could be predicted and exploited by future enemies. But as she looked out at the stars, Sarah felt confident that they had learned the right lessons from their near catastrophe. Galactic civilization had discovered that its greatest strength wasn't military power or advanced technology. It was the willingness to listen to voices that didn't fit conventional patterns, to trust insights that came from unexpected sources, and to value the kind of diverse thinking that made prediction impossible. After all, the best way to prevent future conspiracies was to ensure that no enemy could ever again assume they understood how galactic civilization would respond to threats. Sometimes the most important person in the room was the one everyone else thought didn't belong there. And sometimes the new girl turned out to be exactly what everyone needed, even if they didn't realize it until it was almost too late. Sarah Chen had started as a specialist monitoring empty space on a remote station. She ended as the architect of a new approach to galactic security that would protect civilization for generations to come. Not bad for someone who was only supposed to watch and report.